Tony Leon, thank you very much for your time. Your latest opinion piece captures the state of the world and South Africa's international relations, or lack of relations. It's an excellent read.
Thank you.
Quoting US scholar Professor Michael Beckley, you highlight the immense power the USA wields. The United States remains an economic powerhouse, accounting for 26% of global GDP. The American economy is twice as large as the Eurozone and, incredibly, 30% larger than the combined economies of Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. While, in dollar terms, China's economy is shrinking compared to that of the US and barely growing. You follow this by saying South Africa faces a world of pain from the new disorder unleashed by Trump. Would you please elaborate on this?
Yes, well, look, it's in plain sight, in the sense that we've already seen the total cutoff of US aid to South Africa, which is going to have a devastating impact on a range of recipients and clients, from HIV/AIDS patients and sufferers, right through to a belt of NGOs who do a lot of community, communal health, and other works and public goods. So that's already starting to happen, and the retrenchment notice has already been sent in. But in a way, that's almost peripheral to the trade impact. I mean, I'm speaking to you, and you're in the headquarters, in George, of the Southern Cape, which is, such an agri-rich corner of our country. And we do get, admittedly, probably no more than 4 or 5% of our agri exports to America on a zero tariff basis. Well, that's going to change, because I think in September, it's an absolute racing certainty that AGOA won't be renewed. But if you just go further down the coast from where you are to cities like East London and Port Elizabeth, which are the absolute capitals of our motor industry, a lot of our automotive manufacturing capacity is contingent on us getting that duty-free access to America, which I think, there's absolute certainty is not going to continue. It is possible, of course, and I don't know how advanced this is, that South Africa could negotiate a bilateral trade agreement with the United States, but that will require a degree of dexterity and nimbleness that we haven't yet seen, either from our Department of Trade and Industry, and least of all from our Department of International Relations. Now, that's on the trade side. Of course, the weaponry of America is huge. And I'm not saying, that those figures that I quoted in my piece are as the situation is now. Of course, it can also start shrinking America. It can go into recession. It's bigger than our neighbor tariff policies towards Canada and Mexico could have all kinds of knock-on effects, and none of them good for the American economy. But while America is so strong, while it is the dominant, not just economic powerhouse in the world, but one of the, if I might just segue into this, one of the thoughts, we've used it before, for meeting our 58 billion rand budget hole, which is the subject of the current debate between the parties and the GNU, is to get a soft loan from the IMF. Once again, the United States has the majority of the shares in the IMF and indeed in the World Bank. And if they are in a vengeful mood, and I'm not saying they are, but there have been some intimations from the Trump White House that they are towards South Africa, they'll block that. So when I talk about a world of pain, I don't think I'm exaggerating, and we've only seen the beginnings of it.
What I find very interesting is that why is South Africa so much in Trump's focus at the moment? I mean, we're not really this big global player. Is Elon Musk whispering in his ear? What is the reason?
Well, you're quite right. I mean, I mentioned the United States is 26% of the global economy is represented by America. We are less than 1%. I mean, our economy of America is 29 trillion. South Africa's, I don't know, on a good day, 450 billion. So we are an absolute minnow, and they're a big whale shark. But I think there are a number of reasons. I think absolutely Elon Musk, and there are quite a few other South Africans who are in the Trump world. There's David Sachs, there's Joel Pollak, who happened to be my former speechwriter, who's a big cheese at Breitbart News and close to Steve Bannon, who is also one of the most influential Trump whisperers. So I think that's why, and indeed Tucker Carlson, who's not South African, but as you might have seen on Monday night, I think it was Roots of formerly of AfriForum,
yes.
but now Ernst Roots, who was given 2 hours on Tucker Carlson's prime time show, which has 3 million views. But you can rest assured that Donald Trump and the rest of the Trump world would be aware of that, and they're very aware of Tucker Carlson because he is a very, very close to Donald Trump and his circle. So I think personnel, you've got that issue. But I do think, and I mentioned this in my column, that South Africa is on the wrong side of the fence as far as the new American administration is in terms of our foreign alignment. Certainly in respect of Iran, and it was striking, incidentally, that when my column was published on Wednesday, News 24, the same day you had Nomvela Mokonyane, trumpeting her meeting with the Iranian diplomatic representatives in South Africa. We won't hide from our friends, she triumphantly announced. The same lady who said she was going to pick up the rand. Well, we haven't seen the results of that yet. So our pro-Iranian stance. China, of course, is the huge issue here, and I referenced that too in my article because I think that is America's, chief global competitor. And leaving aside the fact that we are seen as pro-China and anti-American, I think the issue is once again goes down to trade because America is very keen to check who's running a trade surplus with it and who's running a trade deficit with China. In other words, which countries are exporting more into the United States than they're importing from America? Well, that's us. And which countries are importing more from China than they're exporting to China? That's us again. So in a way, we have what the Brits would call a double whammy here because you just run an algorithm through the trade codes. You see South Africa is on the wrong side of that particular table. But I think there is a growing body, and I obviously haven't spoken to them directly, but this is what I read closely about, of congressmen and senators, interestingly enough, on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican, who've taken a very negative view of South Africa's alignment with China, with the anti-Israel stance, which is perhaps, I think, the factor most aggravating our relationship for a range of reasons. We really don't have to go into here, Ilse. Israel is a sort of is a touch point for the Trump world. I mean, some of his biggest donors are fundamentally the most pro-Israeli financiers in America. There is no support in the Trump White House for what you might call the Palestinian cause, whatever its merits or demerits might be. There's no echoing sound there, as there was, for example, during the Biden administration. Biden had a much more even-handed approach on Israel, Palestine, Gaza. Trump is completely on the one side of that. So you put all these things together. I think Russia's a bit in the middle because Trump seems to be whispering or repeating everything the Kremlin says about Ukraine, which kind of puts him on one issue on the same side as us. But beyond that, or other than that, I think that we are on the wrong side of the road as far as the White House is concerned. And it's not just the White House now, because Trump has total control over both houses of Congress. There's a Republican majority in the House of Representatives, a Republican majority in the Senate. There's even, you could put it informally, a Republican majority in the United States Supreme Court. So he's got the whole table covered in a political system that traditionally has had very strong checks and balances. All those have been lessened with the arrival of Trump and his particular way of doing business with. And, I'm not saying this to virtue signal. I don't approve of Donald Trump. I don't like his methods. I find his decapitation of huge institutions inside America and the world very troubling. But that's not the realpolitik, not what I would like or you would like or the viewers would be comfortable with, is another story entirely. And that's really what I'm addressing.
Now, addressing the reality, chances are slim, well, most South Africans would agree with me, I think, that chances are slim that the ANC would change their alliance partners across the world. So what does that sort of hold or spell for South Africa? Because we're not going to just say, roll over and say, okay, Donald Trump, we will now side with Israel and we will drop China and we won't be friends with Iran anymore.
Listen, we're a sovereign country. At the risk of stating the obvious, we don't have to just become, his master's voice on the southern tip of Africa to and Donald Trump is famously unpredictable and, changes his views quite quickly. But, it's again, to risk of boring you by quoting myself from my column, as Mandela would say, you've got to box smart. We hitting ourselves in the head, whatever, you can double down saying, nice sounding words, we won't be bullied. Well, that's fine. But when you're a country that's growing on 0.6% with 42% of working age adults, that's 12 million South Africans who could work or want to work and can't find jobs. Then you've got to say, am I acting in my own self-interest, or am I actually acting against my self-interest? So I don't know. Someone much smarter than me or close to the ANC worldview must explain why South Africa went out on a limb by charging Israel with genocide before the ICJ. And I say this because not a single Arab country, not one, joined that petition or that case. And the other day, just in the midst of this uncertainty, Cyril Ramaphosa co-signs an article in the same magazine that you just quoted from at the beginning, and I quoted from, co-signed by the president of Colombia, which is as far away from the Middle East as we are, and the prime minister of Malaysia, ditto, calling out America for being complicit with genocide in Gaza. Well, you've got to say to yourself, why?
Now, what do you achieve by doing that?
And why us? You're in the Southern Cape, I'm in Cape Town. We are thousands of miles away from the troubles of the Middle East. We have no agency there. This moral strutting and parroting that South Africa does is absurd when you think how we've turned a blind eye to every other human rights delinquent regime in the world, far worse than the worst excesses which Israel is accused of. We have either been quiet, silent, or complicit. So suddenly on this one issue, and of course what the Trump world says, yes, that's because the Jews are on Israel and they don't like Jews. I'm not saying that's South Africa's motivation, but when you have such a one-eyed, one-handed approach on international relations and human rights violations, you lead yourselves into very, very troubling and dark corner.
Well, there are many theories about Iran's support of the ANC.
Yeah, maybe look, a lot of people say the ANC is having its bills paid by Iran. Well, they're not very generous, seeing that the ANC seems to be permanently on the edge of bankruptcy. And I've seen no proof of that. So I simply don't know. But that's certainly, there are rumors to that effect.
Yeah. Now the ANC is part of the NU, and the DA went to America in the past week and spoke to very influential people there, trying to supposedly remedy the situation. Do you think in the NU they could get to an agreement to maybe amend some of the race laws, or sort of be softer in their things they say to annoy Trump?
Well, I guess they'll try. Look, the DA's got very little reach. I mean, in foreign affairs. I mean, that the ANC made it quite clear, and I was in those negotiations, that although we put in a bid, that's we being one of the DA negotiators for the foreign ministry or some access to it, it was never on the table as far as the ANC was concerned. I mean, so one ministry, we have far too many deputy ministers. There's an ANC minister and two ANC deputy ministers. Most of these other key ministries, they have some opposition presence in them. This one not. So that tells you its own story. I think the DA's reach is very limited in foreign policy. And so much so, in fact, they probably thought it was a better idea to go themselves, to go and see what's going on in Washington, because they will unlikely be taken as part of any government delegation there, which will probably consist only of ANC personalities. I don't know what the makeup is of Cyril Ramaphosa's delegation, although it's very slow off the ground, is all I can say. But I guess they're trying to, get firsthand, and that's fine. They can get firsthand knowledge and they can say what they're going to say. The ability to actually change policy is limited. It's not unlimited. It's not without some influence, as we've seen with the current budget. But I think you've got to appreciate, or your readers and viewers must, that the DA's most potent power is not actually in the cabinet, it's in Parliament. Because anything that requires a vote in Parliament means the ANC is at risk. And that's why the budget's at risk, because the ANC only has 40% of the seats in Parliament. And the DA's got 22%. So it is really the swing vote whether something from the budget to a piece of legislation gets through. In the cabinet, and we can go back and forth about this, the ANC's got a majority of the cabinet, even though they don't have a majority in Parliament. So anything that requires a parliamentary vote or intervention, DA's got power. In the executive, it's got some power, but largely confined to the ministries it's in. But anything that needs the approval of the legislature is where the DA's power can manifest itself. So that's both an opportunity and a limitation.
What is the effect of this whole white genocide narrative that's going on at the moment? Also on relationships within South Africa, interpersonal relationships?
Yeah, look, I'm not aware of a white genocide in South Africa. I don't feel that I am a victim of a genocide, and I don't know anyone who is. That's not to say that certain communities aren't targeted. I mean, it seems to me a complete fool's mission to say that farmers are not more vulnerable than, folk who live behind walls in urban areas like I do, and perhaps you do as well. I think farmers are more vulnerable. I think farmers are targeted. I think they're under attack. Whether they're under attack because they're white or because they occupy farms, I'm not in an opinion to judge. But clearly, there's a significant number of farm attacks, and frankly, the ANC's response to this is ludicrous. To say, oh well, actually we have high crime in South Africa, farmers aren't. Well, the crime rate in South Africa is actually an outrage. The fact that farmers are specifically vulnerable because of where they live and because of the distances and the difficulty of securing a large area from outside intruders is another matter. But so crime itself is, almost become the new normal here for the last several decades. So, and there is clear discrimination against white people in this country. That's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of fact. I mean, the Institute of Race Relations has got a register of 140 race laws. Every time you tender for a contract, or tender for a contract from a government agency, your lack of racial credentials is going to count against you if you're white. And if you're black, you can, according to the same surveys, you can get up to a 25% advantage. So now we can argue or debate, as many do, what the origins of this is, because people say, well, there was 350 years of discrimination the one way, you got a positive discrimination the other way. But you say that to a young Afrikaans guy who's making his way, who was born after 1994. That's not going to cut much ice with him. He's going to say, in that famous old expression, why the sin's the father, or in his case, the grandfather visited on me. And that's a fair question to ask. So clearly, whether it's morally correct or it's immoral, depending on your standpoint, there is very active discrimination against people in this country on a racial basis. We've changed the targets of that discrimination, but they are nonetheless discriminated against.
But I have to just say that I don't like the white genocide, being pushed. It feels to me like an agenda.
I think it's grossly exaggerated,
yes.
And I don't think it helps actually achieve a solution. But it gets you a headline. It gets you, as you would know, Ilse, you're in the media world. You get very active clickbait when you put white genocide in a horrifying graphic up. Every time someone wants to have a go at me, they mention that my father executed Solomon Mashlangu when he was a judge. It's completely untrue, incidentally.
Yeah.
Judge Taron did that, but it doesn't matter. That gets the attention. So you can tell a lot of untruths, but it's very good for your social media followers.
It shines the light on an issue. True.
Absolutely.
Then I want to ask you, you close your piece, and I quote, "These are the toughest of times here and in the world." Okay, and you point to a lack of leadership and, sort of real thought leaders. How do you see this playing out?
Well, I think there is an absence, certainly, of leadership in South Africa on the political stage. Not there are some good leaders, but they're in the minority. I look at how someone like Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Britain, who's not an inspirational figure, he's not, Churchill, he's not even Boris Johnson, but, I think the way he's navigating the situation is very smart. He doesn't agree with Trump, but he handles him in a specific way, which doesn't get the engines of disrespect, ignited. And he's done something extraordinary. He's a left-wing Labour leader. He's now basically stopped British or cut massively Britain's aid budget and putting it into defense. And he's doing that because of Trump's arrival and what Trump has indicated the future of NATO. Now, that is clever. You might think it's because, if someone on the left Labour side can do that and say, well, I wouldn't want to cut foreign aid, but we've got to actually make sure that Europe's properly defended against Russia. He's got the perfect cover to do so. Now, if you applied that to South Africa, if Cyril Ramaphosa boxed smart, to use a Mandelaism, he would say, look, I don't necessarily, I have a preference for BE laws. I have a view about our Palestinian solidarity, but we've got a real threat coming to us from the United States, and we're going to just have to change things in order to meet that threat and to get on the right side of that page. That would be smart.
If you were Cyril Ramaphosa, or the leader of South Africa today, the president, what would you do?
Well, I would first of all make sure I had an ambassador in Washington who had access to the White House and the State Department. Our ambassador hasn't, the doors closed to him, so that's the first thing I would do. The second thing is I would accept the realities as they are, not as I wish them to be. Big difference. And thirdly, I would say, well, what can I actually hold off on? Do I actually need to write another article attacking America and Israel at the height of this? That's, incredibly stupid thing to do. Because what's the advantage? What do we get out of cooperating with Colombia and South America and Malaysia and Asia to advance our national self-interest? Zilch, zero, nada, as they say in South America. So I would stop doing stupid things. I think stopping to do stupid things is the beginning of wisdom. That's what we need to do.
Mr. Tony Leon, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.
Dankie, Ilse.